Good evening. The opinions and statements voiced by our guests do not necessarily reflect the opinions of this network. Enjoy the shows.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, Birmingham, Alabama.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army. Army officers say the missile, found sometime last week, has been inspected at Roswell, New Mexico, and sent to Wright Field, Ohio, for further inspection.
Now, historic films made in the spring of 1948 and just released show Eniwetok preparing for heavily guarded and still largely secret tests of new atomic weapons. The test's purpose is to measure atomic effects on thousands of different materials, 30,000 tons of them, not, as at Bikini, to prove military effectiveness.
San Francisco police say that 9 persons have been arrested in a narcotics raid on the headquarters of the Grateful Dead, a widely popular singing group. 2 members of the group, Rod McKernan and Robert Weir, and their business manager, Danny Rifkin, have been booked on suspicion of possessing narcotics.
3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11. Tower cleared.
We got a roll program. Neil Armstrong reporting the roll and pitch program, which puts Apollo 11 on a proper heading.
I'm going to step off the limb now. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Well, strange lights are causing a viral buzz on YouTube. Could we have caught extraterrestrial activity on a recent newscast? Brandon Arroyo investigates.
As the newscast ended, the controversy began back on September 26th. What is that light shining in the back of the dark night sky?
With coverage reaching all the way back to 1948, for over 70 years, Fate magazine has brought you reports of the strange and unknown, all of them true. Now, Fate Magazine Radio is carrying on that tradition of setting the standard in paranormal talk radio as we report and discuss some of the most mysterious and perplexing phenomena imaginable in this strange world of ours. Now, here is your host of Fate Magazine Radio, Kat Hobson.
Good evening. Welcome to Fate Mag Radio, the online voice of Fate Magazine. I am Kat Hobson, your host, and I am really so excited about tonight's show. Of course, I love everything that I get to do, but sometimes you come across somebody whose bio is just kind of like, really? Well, that's pretty neat. And tonight's guest is one of those people. I am really looking forward to this. Peter Robbins is someone who has contributed to numerous books, and I've looked on Amazon, and some of them I'm going to need to take out a mortgage for, and that's okay, but they're worth it. But, it's interesting. He has done so much. His work has included experiencer research. Y'all may remember when we spoke with Deb Cottle White, we had Intruders. So Peter was a large part of creating the Intruders Foundation. That is something that I would like to have a discussion with him about, because I find that fascinating. I am always interested when people go out of their way to help other people. And Bud Hopkins was someone that I didn't get to meet, but by Jingo, I really admired him. He regressed people that I know, and Kathleen Martin has also regressed people that I know, and it's something that to me is frightening because I know how they reacted, and I've heard some of the recordings, and they will break your heart. So while not all of the experiences are negative by any means, some of them have been, and some of them were just so flipping frightening that there's really not any way to get past that. And Peter, in a lot of his writing, has addressed those particular topics. So he has written as the assistant for a member of Parliament as well as a member of the United Nations, papers that were discussing this topic. He is the host of Meanwhile Here on Earth. I love that title. I think that's just fantastic. And hello, Robert in chat. I'm so glad to see you. It's been a while. And Peter, thank you so much for joining me. If I've read the whole bio or talked about the whole bio, we'd be here for days. And I've got a chance to chat you up, and I'm going to take it. I'm very excited about it. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure, Kat.
So, I know, as you said, you've done this a time or two, and I'm always interested because when I speak to most people about this topic, either they have had a personal experience, or someone close to them has, or they're science-based solely, and just flabbergasted by the notion that this could be real, and then they find out it is. What angle did you come at this from? Why did you start researching this topic?
Simply because I became obsessed with it in a very brief span of time, and I didn't feel I had any alternatives. It began for me consciously in my later 20s with absolutely zero interest in the subject. Same as I really had as a kid. I had lots of other things that interested me. As far as UFOs went, what I was, my only real awareness of the subject was the science fiction movies that myself and my young friends would see often Saturday afternoon at our local movie theater. But I guess I intuited, in so many words, the adult message that this is fantasy, and just again never really gave it much thought. I was born in New York City, and when I was 7, our folks moved my sister Helen and I out to a village about 30 miles east of the city on Long Island, which is where I came of age, a lovely village called Rockville Center. And when I was 14 and my sister was just
recording
12,
in progress.
My apologies.
My sister was just 12. We were playing out, really just goofing around in the front yard, mid-morning or thereabouts. It was June. The weather was beautiful, and we were just hanging out. And I caught some movement in the sky out of my right peripheral vision, and either said Helen or look, and in came at a high rate of speed and then stopping very precisely 5 silvery white disc-shaped objects. They were in a very precise V, as in Victor, formation. They stopped over the house across the street. Although they were, I'm sure, quite high, they were close enough that we could clearly see regular detailing around the edge of each, which, when we spoke about it many years later, we immediately couldn't imagine it being anything other than basically how windows on an airliner at an appreciable distance might look. And we just stood there and looked. To compress the story a little, because it does go on, I was to say, nobody's prepared for this. As a rule, you're living your life, going about doing what you're doing, and you look up and you see a thing or things that are not familiar, and it goes from there. In my mind, I went through a list of things that I immediately knew they were not. And in the intervening decades, I'm sure I've heard the exact same story from at least 100 people around the world. They look up and they see the thing or things, and their minds rattle off not planes, kites, balloons, blimps, helicopters, dirigibles, reflections from the ground, flocks of birds, strange-shaped clouds, flotsam and jetsam. What am I looking at? And the fact that these things were elliptical, like a dinner plates held out at a distance. I kept trying to find a way to convince myself that this was somehow familiar, or that something the shape of a plate could hang in the air. No movement at all. And I knew I was in the presence of something other. And I was so unprepared for it. I was such a naive kid, happy childhood, everything good. But this absolutely threw a wrench into everything for me. In my mind, I thought, if what I'm seeing is real, then maybe it's some kind of secret government craft. This is the early 60s. And I could not convince myself of that. They didn't have tails or propellers or jet engines or wings. And at a certain point, I just became so anxious that I went to run into the house to tell her mother. And I was either knocked out or passed out. And when I came to, they were gone. My sister was upstairs in her room. I told my mom what we had seen, or the words that I used, because I lived through this years later with two different hypnotists, one being Bud Hopkins and the other being a highly decorated New York City police detective who was one of my early mentors and also trained in hypnotic regression, but in his case for criminal investigation. And the words that I used, there's my mom at the stove making us lunch, I think grilled cheese sandwiches. Said, Mom, Helen and I just saw something in the sky, some things in the sky that look like flying saucers in the movies. I don't know how many people I've spoken to over the years who, reflecting back on their experience as children or as a parent of a usually young child, confronted this situation from one point of view or the other. And so many people have told me, I didn't know what else to say. Yeah. Your kid says something like that, and you're immediately dealing with your own anxiety, and you don't want them to pick up on your anxiety. So you tell a white lie, oh, honey, or you just make something up. It just seemed that way, or you just imagined it, or it might have been something. Don't insult my intelligence if you don't know what it is. My mother made a decision that I think was incredibly right. It was completely intuitive, and more than 14 years later, because that memory was totally repressed by me within a relatively short time. And Helen and I sat down and over dinner talked to our parents about this series of memories. What she did was simply turn from the stove and look at me. And I remember thinking, this is the way grown-ups look at each other. And she did not feel compelled to say something. And by not saying anything, she respected what I had said in my mind. And also in my thinking, she treated me like an adult. She didn't have an answer, and she looked at me seriously for a few moments and then went back to cooking. again, to compress, within a matter of probably a few weeks, I had done the miraculous. I had locked that memory up tight as a drum under a process, again, that many people have described to me over the years, sadly, often having to do with much more conventional and all too common traumas, whether it's physical abuse, sexual abuse, or what have you. You can't deal with it now. You don't. And the memory went away. And it emerged once and then died back down again. And something more than 14 years later, it came roaring back with a vengeance. I think I know why it happened when it happened, but I think the most important reason was I was ready to deal with it. And after tremendous upset, because when that memory came back, it was clear as a bell, like a tape loop running through my head. I'd never had an experience like that. And my first thought, and this is not uncommon either, is there's something wrong with me. I'm having some kind of mental aberration. This couldn't happen. Wait, this happened. I remember it's the most amazing thing that I ever saw in my life. How could I have forgotten it? And that upset me tremendously. And I broke down and got myself together after that, had a cup of tea, and thought, well, now what? And the now what was obvious. My sister was living a mile or so north of me in the East Village. I had a loft down in Chinatown as an aspiring painter. And I called her, and was it a good time to talk? And had thought this out beforehand, thankfully, and said, I've remembered something from childhood, and I need to know what you remember about it. And I'm concerned that if I just say what it was, you'll say yes or no. And I won't really know what you know. So let me set the scene. And what I did, Kat, was just started to describe that morning, the weather, our ages, where we were standing in proximity to each other, and she cut me off mid-sentence and said, stop, I know what you're talking about. And then went on to share the same memory, but she wasn't sure whether it was 5 or 6. And we worked that out very quickly the next day, because when we got off the phone, I began to do my first ever painting of a UFO, in this case, a rendition of what we had seen. But I did 6 instead of 5. And when she came over the next day, I was holding my hand just above the 6th one. And when I lifted it, she said, you're right, it was 5, because it was an equilateral, triangle, so to say. And that was a very exciting and anxiety-provoking moment for me in one. They're real, and oh my God, they're real. And one would think, well, that would be plenty. But that was really just the setup. What my sister said to me next absolutely changed my life for good and ever. She said, either there's more and I don't know how you're going to feel about it, or there's more and I don't know if you're going to like it. And then in the age before, really we in the UFO research community had any really credible reports of abduction involving UFOs, the Betty and Barney Hill case, and one other one. She started to describe being walked through a curved hall made of metal by beings that we would now immediately refer to as Greys, except that term didn't exist yet. And she said, well, when I was 12 years old, I referred to them as little doctors with big heads and big black eyes. And there was a tall one, and it spoke to me in my head. And then she remembered being on the table, being examined, being back on the ground, coming over to me, bending down, seeing that my eyelids were flickering, intuitively knowing I was coming out of whatever had knocked me out, went into the house. And I had a momentary thought as she started to tell me about all this. Momentary. Oh my God, my sister's gone crazy. And then actually caught myself and almost started to laugh, essentially saying 6 seconds earlier it was okay for 5 flying saucers to be hanging over the street, the house across the street, close enough to see windows, and your sister's going crazy. Listen to what she has to say. I have two sisters. I lost
Can I
Helen.
interrupt you? I apologize. We need to take a break right quick. And this will not be long. We'll be right back. Y'all come back too.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting. The best in paranormal talk radio.
Oh, come on. I'm Southern, but... Nope. That'll do. Hello. I am Kat Hobson, host of Paranormal Experience here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. I enjoy having guests from all areas of the paranormal, from ghosts to ufology to cryptids and beyond. You'll find some of the best researchers in their fields bringing you some great information. Join me on Wednesday nights from 8 to 10 p. Eastern here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
This is Jason Bland, host of Midwest Paranormal Presents Paranormal Soup, where we stream live as a webcast every Sunday night, 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. Eastern, with guests who will blow your mind. Live ghost box sessions where you can call into the show to see if the spirits will talk to you, and the World Wide Web of Weird with the latest in paranormal news and evidence. We're bringing the weird every Sunday night, 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. Eastern on our Facebook page and YouTube channel. Don't forget to follow and subscribe.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experience Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama. Since 1948, Fate magazine has brought you reports of the strange and unknown, all of them true. Fate Radio is carrying on that tradition, bringing you the unusual, macabre, strange, and bizarre. Join host Kat Hobson Sunday nights from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, Birmingham, Alabama.
Thank you for listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. The time is 23 minutes after the hour. And we are back here on Fate Mag Radio, and my guest is Peter Robbins, who is such a fantastic person, and I'm really excited to have him here. And he was actually relating an experience, and Peter, I am very appreciative of you doing that, but please excuse the interruption and feel free to go ahead. You were talking about, having had more craft than you remembered, and it's just fascinating to me.
Yeah, I from that moment on, I either had to accept the possibility that was my sister was saying was actual and not allegorical, or certainly not made up. We were particularly close siblings, and closer than most, and watched out for each other in so many respects. Helen died more than 20 years ago. I have another sister, but I never would have gotten involved in this work, and certainly not to the degree that I did, if I wasn't driven by that initial obsession of what happened to my sister, which continues to inform a great deal of my interest in the subject.
Well, you have a very broad interest in the subject, from the experiencers to educating the public to trying to get governments involved, trying to get working with world leaders to get involvement. How did you come to be involved with Bud Hopkins, from being the child who was experiencing this to going and working with a pioneer in regression? I mean, what was your path to that?
First, unless you're talking about a sighting and the associated experience of it as an experience, because a lot of people use that word specifically in terms of contact. My sister had that experience. I was the one who was kind of knocked out on the sideline. At the time, my only dream and my professional goal was to continue to follow my dream and be a painter, sculptor, artist based in New York City. But immediately, something had become more important to me, and I resented it. I still do to a degree. This subject had really taken over my life, and I started to read what I could find on it. And now, of course, the subject is so popular and so many people are interested in it, knowing that it is worth being interested in and that there's little, if any, ridicule attached to showing a serious interest anymore. But not only had I no idea that there was something called ufology, or that there were people that did this professionally, or that there were UFO conferences, I was clueless. I certainly had never met anybody that had expressed any interest, and certainly not experience to me. And I figured, to start with, I knew my sister and I were sane, but I figured the odds were pretty good that the rest of these people were out of their minds. And so I wasn't going to move very quickly in introducing myself or going out and, seeking comrades in this, not quite yet. I found books in used bookstores, and there were magazines on the newsstands, mostly fairly pulp-oriented or rehashing old cases. And I guess it was certainly under a year, 6 months, 8 months, whenever, into this obsession. It was now 1976. And I was going by a New York newsstand and noticed that one of our weekly newspapers, the Village Voice, had a headline which said, "Sane Man Sees UFO." And I thought, that's for me. I bought the newspaper, went home and read it. It was actually the best written and the best researched single case that I had thus far learned about. At the time, most of the UFO news that was covered in newspapers was covered by tabloids, like the National Enquirer, which now is, of course, very tame, if it's still around, compared to a lot of, the stuff that's out there.
That's true.
But this article, this was different. This was really well researched, and it was written by a man named Bud Hopkins.
Yeah.
As a member in good standing of the New York art world, I knew there was a late period abstract expressionist by that name, but would that be the same person who wrote this article? And I simply went to the New York phone book, looked under Hopkins. There was only one Bud, spelled with 2 Ds, and I just cold called him. He lived really for his whole life in New York, well, most of it, but certainly for the whole time I knew him, on West 16th Street. I was living in Chinatown, and I introduced myself and told him that I was a painter also, and on the faculty of the School of Visual Arts, where I'd graduated from, and that my sister and I had had a sighting when we were kids, and I had read his article and thought it was terrific, and that my sister may have had some kind of encounter as well. And he listened to me, and his very first question was, "Tell me about your artwork." That didn't really go well. We were of very different generations with very different interests and very different philosophies informing the work we were doing. I was coming out of minimal conceptual pop art, process art, performance art. But he was interested enough in my sister's account that he invited me over for coffee later that week. And I showed up at the door and went upstairs. We sat at his kitchen table and kind of got to introduce ourselves and talked mostly about New York City and the art world and the work that we were doing, books we were reading, about my sister's experience as well. And, you know, there are times in your life when something's happening and you have no idea of its significance until you have some perspective on it way in the future. And I couldn't have imagined that that was the beginning of a 35-year-long friendship and colleagueship, and to a degree mentorship, that totally affected my life and gave me one of the greatest windows on an historic moment, so to say. Over the next 4 or 5 years, we would get together every few months, coffee, sometimes dinner, lunch, and talk about our growing interest in the subject. We gave our very first UFO talks together, I'm proud to say, on the stage of the School of Visual Arts over at 23rd Street. I knew they were always looking for interesting speakers, and I presented the idea of myself and this other painter who were getting interested in this subject to do a presentation. And Bud invited the man who had had the experience that he had documented, and it was an extraordinary case. And we were off and running, in a sense. At that point, though, Bud really made a decision that put him on the map some years later, which was this idea that up until that moment in the world of UFO studies, there was little responsible attention being paid to the occupants. It was all about the vehicles. Yes. That was safer to discuss. And let's remember, you know, and 40 years ago plus, the field was dominated by middle-aged white guys, as it still is, who in great part were concerned about being taken seriously, as we all are. And it was okay to talk about radar returns and declassified documents, lights in the night sky, trace cases where physiological changes may take place when put in contact with some kind of anomalous phenomena. But as Bud's dear colleague and friend, Dr. David Jacobs, said once, we were fixated on the cars and not the drivers.
Yes.
To talk about the drivers made you seem like you were less emotionally or mentally stable. And he began to research the phenomena and see the patterns. And in 1981, he published his first book, Missing Time, which has, of course, now not only did he pioneer that aspect of the abduction process, but he gave the English language a new phrase.
Yes, he did.
Most people understand that phrase missing time refers to the paranormal, or specifically to the UFO subject. Yes. as opposed to the word gray, which back then would have meant nothing except a shade between black and white. And now everybody, that picture of that ubiquitous alien comes to mind.
Well, you know, to me, that's really an interesting concept, because I always thought that Whitley's book, Contact, was where the gray features became known, like universally. But I did not realize that the majority of people who were having experiences, that is who they were seeing.
I'll tell you a story. Whitley, in, I think, 1986, came to Bud Hopkins. He had read Missing Time. He was having these experiences with himself, his family, friends, upstate at his home, other locations. And he was beside himself. I was privy to this information at the time as Bud's assistant, and I was and remain good at keeping confidences. And I'm not saying anything here that's in any way still, inappropriate to speak about in public. But Whitley confided to Bud that there were times he was having suicidal ideations. It was incredibly stressful for him. Bud encouraged him, and it was just the right thing with the right person, to exorcise it, to get it out, to write it out, which Whitley did. And when he was finished, he had that manuscript. At that point, he asked Bud, it had been professionally proofread. I mean, again, at that point, Whitley was already a very successful novelist with a Stephen King kind of lean to a lot of his work. But he knew that once this book was published, he would be opening himself to a great deal of ridicule, criticism, negative stuff, because he was famous as a writer, and a writer of... Anyway, he called me one day. I had spoken with Bud about him, but I had never spoken with him. And he just cold called me at home, said, I know you know everything that's been going on with me. I've got this manuscript, and it's been professionally proofread, but I asked Bud if he knew of anyone who, number one, is a good writer, who is a fairly good editor, who can keep a confidence, and who would give me an honest appraisal of what I've written. And Bud suggested me, and I was flattered, of course, and told him I'd be happy to read it and could send it over. He said, no, there's one printed copy, and it's not leaving my house.
Oh, my.
What I need...
I did not know.
Well, nobody did. It's just the way he worked. And it made sense to me, especially with the manuscript of that loaded a nature. And he said, when can you come over and spend the day? And as it worked out, that next Saturday, I showed up for breakfast, met his wife Ann and son, and they put me in a guest room with the manuscript. And I was there through 2 meals and lots of snacks, and did not leave that room until I finished the book. Gave him my impressions of it. He thanked me. The book went to the publisher, and of course was a huge smash hit, not just here, but in all over the world, at least in 15 countries. But you bring up the very well-known illustration on his cover. Bud had found him a cover artist, and the artist had done some homework and created that image that was so compelling to so many people. What turned out to be most interesting about that image is no one anywhere that I have ever heard of has ever seen or described a being quite like that. It's an invention of the artist, informed by what some people say they've seen. But no one has seen a being like that. And so Whitley started to get a whole subset of letters, as did Bud, saying, dear Mr. Strieber, I saw your book in the bookstore. I had this feeling, that feeling. I read the book, but I have to tell you, the one that I saw, and Bud would get the same letters. The mouth was different, that didn't have that nose, the eyes were not quite. And thousands of people several thousand people wrote to these two men to correct from their memory the image on the book cover that, again, was just done by an artist to sell books. And it certainly helped to do just that.
Well, I have to ask, were the corrections all similar?
Corrections.
The corrections that they were sending, that they were discussing, when they were correcting the characterization?
Well, the cover of the book never changed, no.
No, but I mean, but did the people's descriptions that they thought needed, the differences from the book cover to what these people were describing?
Yeah.
Were they all similar?
They were very similar. They were essentially versions of a gray with the tiny slit nose, just the simplest indication. 2 dots for nose, thin lips, very large, kind of wraparound, dark eyes. But yes, people corrected that fantasy illustration informed by some fact to describe a ubiquitous, archetypical gray. Anyway, very shortly after Communion came out, Intruders came out, which was the biggest bestseller for Budd. A brilliant case study involving a woman in Indiana.
Yes,
who,
I've had her on my show.
Yeah, she remains a very good friend since we first met back in the 1980s. And Budd's next book, published in 1996, was Witness, the true story of the Brooklyn Bridge UFO abductions. Certainly the most challenging investigation I think he was ever involved in. Yes. It took 5 years to complete that investigation, and that was the one I was most involved in as well, which a lot of people dismiss because it's just too wild. Meanwhile, almost no one who has actually taken the time to read the book does that. And that's the way it often is in UFO studies, because some of what is reported is so extraordinary. Many people who have opinions based on what they feel, what they believe, what they're comfortable with, and in no way based in having read or even having a familiarity with the material that they are sometimes criticizing, which is not really a very good way to go.
I have found that never does me any good. It's always better to have an informed opinion before you start asking questions.
Yeah.
Or trying to judge.
I continued on as Bud's assistant, basically whenever he needed me, and there would be times I would work several days a week for months, and other times take some time off.
I apologize again. We're going to have to take some time off because we have to zip off to a break, but this one's much shorter. So everyone listening, you don't want to touch that dial, as Mark Fultz says. So we'll be right back after this. Y'all come back too.
You're listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experience Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Oh, come on. I'm Southern, but... Nope. That'll do. Hello. I am Kat Hobson, host of Paranormal Experience here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. I enjoy having guests from all areas of the paranormal, from ghosts to ufology to cryptids and beyond. You'll find some of the best researchers in their fields bringing you some great information. Join me on Wednesday nights from 8 to 10 p. Eastern here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
Since 1948, Fate magazine has brought you reports of the strange and unknown, all of them true. Fate Radio is carrying on that tradition, bringing you the unusual, macabre, strange, and bizarre. Join host Kat Hopson Sunday nights from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
You're listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experienced Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Welcome back to Fate Mag Radio, the online voice of Fate Magazine. And my guest tonight is Peter Robbins. And Peter, I have been having such a great time with listening and learning from you, listening to and learning from. And I apologize for these breaks. If I could get away with it and didn't think they'd put them in the wrong spot when they run my shows, I'd never do them. I like straight through. But thank you for tolerating that. And I actually cut you off in mid-thought when you...
Well, just that after Intruders was published, 87 being an important year for people who are interested in the subject. It was the 40th anniversary of our so-called modern age of UFOs beginning in 1947. 3 very influential UFO books, among many other books, were published that year, which was Communion, Intruders, and Timothy Good's Above Top Secret in England, very important volume. And I just started to work more regularly. My job's responsibilities included entry-level interviews, getting people back to people who had called, responding to literally every letter that came. This is well pre-internet, with a brief note on our note paper, written by hand and mailed. Even if it was just somebody who, "Dear Mr. Hopkins, I'm a fan," that kind of thing. Bud worked out a very simple code of like stars and circles and things that I would use on envelopes as I would open and read letters, signifying that it was a fan mail, an inquiry for information, a journalist request, a seemingly somebody who had had an experience, or all the bells and whistles, and seeming to me that it was somebody who genuinely had had something extraordinary happen and needed to see him. A fair amount of just filing, every interview that he ever did, every hypnotic regression that he ever did was audio taped. And all those tapes were filed. Everybody had a file, and there were hundreds of them. So it was a matter of just, keeping things in an orderly manner in the equivalent of a business office just off of his painting studio. And that's the way it rolled along until about 1989, when Bud and I was a founding member, but Bud founded the Intruders Foundation, which is a nonprofit that was about outreach to people who had had experiences, education to people that wanted to learn more about this phenomena, and a lecture program, where for about 3/4 of the year, every 6 weeks or so, we'd have somebody in who would give a talk at a space we would rent in the West 30s in Manhattan, often stay in Bud's guest room. And we had a number of conferences and the support group meetings that Bud pioneered. And it was quite an extraordinary period of time for me, being in the middle of it all.
No doubt. Well, I think that to say that you are one of the pioneers on the experiencer side is not not a stretch at all. And the fact that you got to understand that what happened to you was not an isolated incident that had to be beneficial for you, I would think. Go ahead.
Technically, what happened to my sister?
Well, yes,
not,
but
yeah.
But you were a sideline participant of nothing else.
Oh yeah.
I mean, you experienced the
I was right there.
Visual. Yes.
Yes, and I had my experience. Yes.
And it's interesting to me because I have had a lot of female experiencers who have reached out to me, and it seems like it's not proportionate, the difference between the number of males and the number of females. Is that held up by the research?
I've never seen statistics for that. My experience, again, thinking back over all of the people that I was privy to, that Bud worked with or met with over the decades, of the general mixture of our support groups, of people who would subscribe to our newsletter, people who would come to our lectures, I think it was pretty even. However, it doesn't surprise me that you say that. Men, it's a sweeping generalization, but men often have more difficulty admitting how completely ineffectual or vulnerable or helpless they were in a situation. It goes to ego to a degree, the protector image, that kind of thing. And
it's not comfortable.
It's for anybody that has these kinds of experience, you're going through your own personal process. And if somebody out there has put together verifiable or respectful of the truth statistics about the mix of male to female, I'm wondering whether it be more who has the experiences or who reports having had the experiences. And I'm guessing even that number is shifting over the past few years, since the climate has changed somewhat in terms of ridicule and social acceptance.
It's it just strikes me as so odd, because I would like to see those numbers. I've often been just so surprised by the fact that it just seems like there would be more men. The only men that I've really spoken to who have shared this publicly are Travis and Whitley. I know there are others, but as far as the type of experiences that the women share, it seems to be more focused on genetics or DNA sampling. And I think that Travis now feels that his abduction or experience was to heal him, because he was inadvertently damaged when he was hiding in a bush in a backwash, from what I understood. And Whitley just had these ongoing experiences, but they prepared him to be able to communicate with his wife after she crossed also. So there were yins and yangs that came through all of that. But I have really, to me, it seems disproportionate just based on the people that I talk to and who are open with it, even now.
Well,
when I go to conferences, I don't see a lot of sharing by men.
That's right. But that is not an indication that these things are not happening to men.
Well, I understand that.
Yeah.
But
I can't argue the point because we don't have hard statistics, but my experience is very much pretty equal. Again, I'm a fairly high visibility person in this work. I'm known as somebody who, again, maintains confidences and treats people with respect, but not everybody does. I'm just saying, people have confided things to me in my various roles over the years that they might not to the next person over, speaking of the world of men. And also, I think some men who are armored up around this might feel particularly reticent about sharing it with a woman as opposed to a man, because they would feel that much more vulnerable, which is part of the condition of a lot of men.
It's a social conditioning. But, I was just thinking, because I do participate in experiencer groups on occasion, and never as press, never as somebody that's going to be talking about anyone's individual experience that's, not already public. But I was just thinking back over the groups, and I think that what you're saying is absolutely correct, that they're not comfortable, because the groups over the last couple of years have started having more men. When I first started, there were hardly any that would come into these large experiencer groups. And I am seeing it more often. So perhaps that taboo is being lifted. They're a little bit more comfortable, as you said, with wanting to do that. It's got to be so difficult because, as you also stated, it is almost like a genetic thing.
Yes.
We have got to get to some of these questions. Robert in chat said that the trouble with non-human encounters is that humans are involved. Humans have so many preconceptions going in, and I've got to agree, Robert, because I know that when I see things in my sky, and I do, because I'm a sky watcher. I lay in a hammock, I lay in a gravity chair, I'm sitting outside with my dogs, and I just love to watch what's going on. I see the satellites, I love it, every bit of it. And so I see things because I'm looking, and it's fairly consistent. It's not always satellites, it's not always planes, but I think more people are, especially during the pandemic, more people were watching the skies. It's like after 9/11, there were no planes, right? They brought the planes down. We had a couple of days with nothing in the air. During the pandemic, again, we had nothing that was every day in the air. And I was seeing a lot more reporting going through because I checked the reporting sites and such. Did you see that also? I mean, were you aware of that?
Yeah, to a degree. I just wasn't preoccupied with it.
I kind of went around this corner on you there, but it's like people's eyes got opened a little bit, I guess, is where I was going with that. But we are going to be at the top of the hour, which is when we take our news break. And when we come back, if you would, I would really like to address some of these questions. They're great ones, and they're right in your wheelhouse. You're going to love them. But are you up for that?
Oh, sure. Well, however you want to spend the time. Absolutely.
Well, I could spend the time going over, listening to you for your experiences and your writings, but I'm enjoying you. So we will be back. We're going to go ahead and get this out of the way. And we are going to get to our chat room questions. If you have questions, you can put them in the chat here. You can even message me. Shoot me a message on Facebook if you have them, or under Fate Mag Radio on Facebook, and we will get them answered. So y'all come back. We'll be back too.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Janine Herbst. The Swiss bank UBS says it will take over its smaller competitor, Credit Suisse, for more than $3 billion in a government-brokered deal aimed at containing a crisis of confidence in global financial markets. NPR's Rob Schmitz has more.
The all-share deal between Switzerland's two largest banks will be priced at a fraction of Credit Suisse's closing price on Friday, when the bank was valued at around $8 billion. The government brokered deal took the unusual move of bypassing a vote by shareholders on the takeover because they were in a rush to announce a deal before Asian markets opened Monday morning. Switzerland's president of the Federal Council called the deal the best solution for restoring confidence in global financial markets.
NPR's Rob Schmitz reporting. Asia markets are open and trading at this hour. The Asia Dow is down about 0.6%, but U.S. futures contracts are trading higher on the news. Ukrainian officials have expressed outrage over Russian President Vladimir Putin's surprise visit to the occupied city of Mariupol. NPR's Eleanor Beardsley reports Putin flew by helicopter from Crimea to Mariupol at night.
Ukraine's defense ministry said the visit took place under cover of night, quote, as befits a thief. Darkness allows him to highlight what he wants to show and keeps the city, his army completely destroyed, and its few surviving inhabitants away from prying eyes, the ministry said on social media. Presidential aide Mikhailo Podolyak said on Twitter, the criminal always returns to the crime scene, adding that, quote, the murderer of thousands of Mariupol families came to admire the ruins of the city and its graves. Russia shelled Mariupol for weeks last spring, killing thousands. Many are missing or buried in mass graves. Russia has occupied the city since last May. The Kremlin says Putin's working visit was to oversee reconstruction. Eleanor Beardsley, NPR News, Druzhkivka, Ukraine.
Wyoming has now enacted some of the harshest abortion restrictions in the country. A law known as the Life is a Human Right Act went into effect this weekend. From Jackson Hole Community Radio Station KHOL, Hannah Merzbach has more.
According to the CDC, Wyoming offers some of the lowest numbers of abortions in the country. Now, it'll be even more difficult to get one. It's now a felony to give an abortion in Wyoming, and provider Jovanina Anthony says she's already had to cancel 3 appointments.
What these laws do, they force physicians like myself to choose between providing good evidence-based care and my own welfare, and that's an impossible choice to make.
Anthony is one of several plaintiffs who have filed a legal challenge to halt the abortion ban. A judge will hold a hearing Wednesday. For NPR News, I'm Hannah Merzbach in Jackson, Wyoming.
This is NPR News. Croatia destroyed a huge anti-ship mine from World War II that was buried in the seabed near a key northern Adriatic seaport. Authorities evacuated parts of the port city of Rijeka and sounded emergency sirens early today to mark the start of the operation. The mine, discovered last June, was too close to the city and it had to be moved further away before emergency teams could perform the controlled detonation. Police say the mine was dangerous and contained huge quantities of explosives. In the NCAA women's basketball tournament, defending champ South Carolina advanced to the Sweet 16 after a 76-45 victory over South Florida. Greg Eklund has more.
South Carolina remains unbeaten at 34-0 and extended its winning streak to 40 straight dating back to last year. The Gamecocks are trying to become the 5th team to win the NCAA tournament with an unbeaten record. But Coach Dawn Staley says the team is focused more on the national championship.
That's all we really think about. And at this point, we don't think about losing. We just think about what's in front of us and trying to make it to the next stage of this tournament.
The Gamecocks, led by 4 at halftime, then opened up their margin in the second half. For NPR News, I'm Greg Eklund.
U.S. futures contracts are trading higher at this hour. Both the Dow futures and S&P 500 futures contracts are up about 0.6%. NASDAQ futures are up just over 0.5%. Crude oil futures are also trading higher, up about 0.5% at $67.12 a barrel. I'm Janine Herbst, NPR News.
NPR's Invisibilia goes deep on the questions that keep us up at night.
Are you my best friend still? ?
If you had all the power you wanted, what would you do with it?
What's the thing I want that's hard?
What good is vision without a big one?
Listen to Invisibilia wherever you get your podcasts.
Listen to this podcast sponsor-free on Amazon Music with a Prime membership or any podcast app by subscribing to NPR News Now Plus at plus.npr.org. That's plus.npr.org.
Welcome back to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. The time is 5 minutes after the hour. Welcome back to Fate Mag Radio, the online voice of Fate Magazine. I am Kat Hobson, your host, and I just wanted to let you know I have had some questions relevant to if we are still publishing. The answer is yes, and we are doing pretty well with that. Our editions are not coming out quite as swiftly as they have in the past. Our fearless leader has suffered a stroke. She is healing, and it's an ongoing process. I am so impressed with her strength and determination, but there are so many things going on. If you need a subscription, if yours is lapsed, or if you need to move over to an online subscription, they're great. And they're constant mail outs, so get on the list for those. Just go to fatemag.com and play around there. There's some great products. There are trading cards, back issues. If you have anything that you're looking for, just get on with it. You'll enjoy it. And I'm also back with my guest, Peter Robbins, who is just so kind and so informative. And Peter, thank you very much for being here tonight. I appreciate that.
I'm glad to. And I just want to send my love and best wishes to my old friend, Phyllis Galdi, for a complete and timely recovery. We need you, Phyllis. Get back in.
We do need her. And thank you for that. I will make sure she knows that's there, too. That if she's not listening, I'm pretty sure she's listening. But she's a wonderful woman. I am ready, if you are, to hit on some of these questions. Is that okay?
Sure.
Well, I have a lot of people that I respect in various fields, and this questioner is one of them, and it's Robert Gorman. And he says, "Hello, Peter. I am interested in paranormal home invasions or bedroom invaders, especially those encounters that disturb our reality in a physical way. Any thoughts?"
I'm sorry, I didn't get that last part.
He said that, do you have any thoughts on that, on those situations?
The more ethereal versus the physical?
Well, the more physical versus the not, where it disturbs people's encounters in a physical way.
Yeah, I do have some thoughts on it. I think after years in the field, that we are dealing with a myriad of entities with their own modus operandis, with their own plans or programs for this planet, for us. And I hear people sometimes arguing literally about, are they good or are they bad? Or why are they here, when those are the wrong questions. We have a lot of things going on. I am very pleased to say and confident in saying, I really don't know. even after more than 40 years. And I have colleagues who will tell you, this group comes from this star system, and this is how their crafts are powered, and this is how many hundreds of thousands of years they've been coming, and these are... I don't know any of that stuff. I think we lean in toward believing what we hope is true, and rejecting what we're uncomfortable with, and that for many people becomes the core of their theories and beliefs. There are things happening to people that are beatific, enlightening, mind expanding, and very positive. And other people are being traumatized. Then there's the sub-argument of, is it because you just have a bad attitude as opposed to an open, loving, trusting presence? And that also is not really the right spirit of inquiry.
The experiencer's attitude?
Well, one can argue that I was brought up with a great deal of fear and anxiety, and I'm not comfortable with things that that are new to me. Therefore, yeah, I'm not going to have a good time with this, as opposed to I was brought up with love and to have courage and trust, and so this was a good experience for me. And that may have nothing to do with the nature of the experience as it was intended to be. I'm saying that there's so many more questions than answers, that for me, a go-to answer quite often is, I don't know. And that
it's
takes
a good
some
answer
people,
sometimes.
well, yes, it is, and a necessary one.
It's okay.
There are people in the work who don't like to admit that they don't know.
Oh, please. It's so much better than, having egg on your face later when you try to act like you knew everything. It keeps your credibility. So.
Yep. Thank you for that question. Robert, I'm sorry I couldn't give you a more definitive answer.
He's not through. So, his next one it's more of a add-on. Events that involve encounters with non-humans without the accompanying UFOs, the Type E's.
I'm a little hard of hearing, Kat, and
That's okay.
I don't. Yeah.
And I talk fast and Southern, so I'll slow down. But he says events that involve encounters with non-humans without the accompanying vehicles, UFOs, the Type E.
Once again, I know as much as you know. You may know more than me. This information, for me, is based on witness testimony, anecdotal material, but often it's simply a matter of belief that somebody states, knowing that you can't prove they're wrong.
Yes.
And that creates a lot of dissonance in this field, even to the point of my opinion, no matter how ill-informed or unschooled or based on nothing but what I feel, is equal to your knowledge, your PhDs, your years of research. No, it's not. We're talking about two different things.
Well, it is.
And I'm speaking euphemistically. I don't have any PhDs.
Me either. So, but probably you have a work-related background that could qualify you if they let you do that. Certainly have enough years of research. When we were talking earlier, and you went back to Roswell when, talking about the anniversaries and stuff. But 2 years later, 2 years before, when there was the crash at Trinity.
Allegedly,
fairly well documented, if I'm not mistaken. I recently interviewed Jacques about that.
Mm-hmm.
And is there more evidence for Roswell than there was for Trinity?
I can't say, because I haven't read his and Paula Harris's book yet. And so I have to defer to a position that frustrates some people, which is I choose not to have an opinion about certain things if it's a completely uninformed opinion.
That's
yes, I have read reviews of the book. I've spoken to people who have read it. I have tremendous respect for Jacques. Paula too, who I've known, been friends and colleagues of for many years, but I don't know enough to have an informed opinion on it. I apologize for that. It's on my list of books that I have yet to read, which is a monster pile, like for all of us.
Yes, I know, right? And it's so wild because I'm fascinated by all of the various authors that I have in my stack of stuff. And my husband is like, how many Kindle books do you have? I was like, I have no idea. But I read them all. It just takes a while. But, if it's not on Kindle and it's out of print, I have a hard time sometimes. So, and I'm all about trying to educate. Because how can I have a good conversation if I don't have a clue what I'm talking about? And you're a host. You know that.
Oh, yeah. One of the first rules.
Well, when you, what is the top of your reading list?
The topic that...
What is at the top of your reading list right now?
Oh, actually an assortment of fiction and nonfiction. A new book from a colleague in the UK that I've just written a forward to, a book that is called, God, I'm blanking. So many books fill my head. Anyway, I'll be reporting on it on my show shortly.
I'll be listening for that.
I just read really a marvelous piece of science fiction, and I'm not a big science fiction reader. And I guess of all the theories that people ascribe to possible UFO phenomena, time travelers from our future is one of them. For whatever reasons, and I know it's probably my own prejudice or my own inability to accept that this technology is feasible, even though I appreciate and accept what Einstein and Edgar Cayce said about time, that it's like a river. Yes. And hypothetically, one should be able to head up the river or down the river. It's a book called Time and Again by an author named Jack Finney. And it's written 70 or 71. I've read it 2 or 3 times, but not for years. And it's particular to a what-if simple piece of brilliant fiction, but based in Manhattan in 1970 or so. That's the premise. And as a lifelong New Yorker, it just resonated wonderfully with me. Plus the opportunity to, if you do what we do and your head is immersed in other people's extraordinary realities, it can be so refreshing to read a piece of overt, entertaining, well-researched, wonderfully written fiction. I will always draw inspiration from authors who create characters. I've never written nonfiction, and I have huge amounts of respect for people who can write it effectively. As far as what else I'm reading right now, I'm reading several books on countries that I visited many years ago, could never return to again probably, for research that I'm doing on another project. So I'm reading right now a lot about Afghanistan, Turkey, Nepal, India, as they were 50 years ago or so. Oh, wow. And it's just a tangent that I'm off on at the moment. At the same time, I read a lot of material that isn't published quite yet, either as a courtesy to colleagues or because somebody has enrolled me in writing a foreword or an afterword.
I have done 2 forewords, and I love them because A, it's an honor, but B, you get to see it. I mean, you have to know what you're writing it about.
Oh yeah,
I love
you must
that
read
too.
the book
I love
before
getting to
you write a
see
forward.
them free. I'm reviewing a book right now for a friend who's never done this kind of work before, and he's a wreck. He's like a cat in a room full of rocking chairs, but he's so excited.
Mm-hmm.
But, excuse me, we have to take a break. These breaks. I don't know if you have to do them on your show, but they come at the worst times. We'll be right back. Y'all come back too.
Warning, the following message does not necessarily reflect the views of WBHM-DB or its hosts, guests, listeners, or of any functioning adult in general. In fact, Frank should probably seek professional help. Listener discretion is advised.
Hi there, Frank Lee here. I thought that I would spend a few moments telling you about the positivity from the network here. The overall message of para-unity and happiness, and how everyone here wants to get along with everyone out there, and how everything is just wonderful. Wait, Cat's not looking. Okay, I've got something to really tell you. Okay, so I'm going to tell you what's really going on. Honestly, all that being nice and positive crap was kind of hurting my soul, as dark as it is. So, what's really happening? You see it all the time. Everybody and their brother out there has a paranormal team because they watch a couple of episodes of Ghost Hunters or some crap like that. So they go and they spend half their mortgage payment on tools and things that light up that they don't understand. And then the next logical step after buying matching black t-shirts and posing like 90s rappers for their Facebook page is to, of course, have their own podcast. Well, you know what? You're not going to find that crap here. What we have here at WBHM Digital Broadcasting is the best host, the best guest, bringing you real information. All of the hosts here on this network know their stuff. They are the people who have been out there doing the work, doing actual research. And no, by research, I don't mean binge watching some kind of cheesy TV show on Netflix. I mean reading books. I mean out in the field doing the legwork. And who are they interviewing on their shows? They're bringing you the people they have learned from. They're bringing you the best in the field, covering all kinds of topics from UFOs and aliens to Bigfoot to cryptozoology to ghosts to anything you can think of a bit strange and unexplained. It is here, and you're going to get the best information here. So stay tuned to WBHM Digital Broadcasting. Don't go anywhere. Speaking of going somewhere, I've got to go before my mic gets cut. We'll see you there on WBHM-DB.
Welcome back to Fate Mag Radio with my guest, Peter Robbins, who is just brilliant, so much experience, so much willingness to share. And we were talking in the previous segment about the possibility that what we consider to be aliens in these craft may be us from the future. And I met a great guy, Michael Masters, at the UFO Congress, and got his book, which is relevant to that topic. He is a PhD. He's I believe in anthropology. He's a university professor, and he wrote a book on that topic. And Peter, his theory is that so far down the line, as we became such an inclusive society and kept going forward, that our DNA was so homogenized that it was not strong enough to sustain. And that's why the people coming either are sending droids or they have evolved to look like that and not have the full sensitivities or whatever, and they're trying to fix their DNA. by coming and getting ours, which would explain a lot of the things that we hear, very strange things that are done to people that are considered testing. So
I have no idea.
Nobody does, but the speculation is fun sometimes. But it's hard to keep up with it. Robert said in chat, time is a river, but you can stand on the riverbank outside of linear time, and maybe that's where our aliens originate. So we're getting all kinds of thought processes coming in. And what else have we not touched on that you came into this thinking that you might like to?
I'm sorry, say again.
It's okay. I said, what have we not touched on that you may have come into this thinking, well, I think I'd like to share that. Is there anything in particular, or were you just going to let me run the thing?
Well, I'm happy to address anything that you'd like to, but you had brought something up, and then we moved on to other things. You had asked me something about the United Nations and UFOs, yes, and how I somehow fit into that in a very, very tiny way. The first assignment of any consequence that I had in this work was a few short years in, when my first mentor, a wonderful guy who during World War II had been a staff officer of the Hungarian army. In fact, his name was Coleman von Kvetski. Before the war, he had been a film director, and he was on the general staff of the Hungarian army as in charge of all photo analysis and photo reconnaissance, as well as film strips for educational purposes for soldiers, and ultimately ended up as a United States citizen, in arriving here a few months before the very famous Washington, D.C. overflights, photographs of formation of UFOs over the Capitol from 1952. And as a photo analyst, that's how he got involved in the work. Anyway, by the time that we met in the 1970s, he was probably already in his early 70s and had quite a network of colleagues throughout the Defense Department, the United Nations, in certain diplomatic circles. He was very well connected. And at the time, he was an acquaintance of Kurt Waldheim. Not friends, but an acquaintance. And Waldheim at that time was Secretary General of the UN. Found out some years later he had been an SS member during the war, which was awkward. But at the time, he was interested in UFOs in terms of their potential to create problems in the modern world. And Coleman, who was something of a visionary, was very concerned, and it's something government should still be concerned about, that at the height of the Cold War especially, if UFOs, truly anomalous ones, strayed over American or Soviet airspace, the country's militaries might interpret it, especially if they did not respond, as a potential enemy air incursion and take action against it, with the possibility, if something like that happened, of initiating potential nuclear conflict. Yes. And he wrote a paper about it, that a long paper that was included in the material that was available to individuals with the UN in November of 1978, when the Special Political Committee of the General Assembly had a series of fascinating meetings to discuss just the possibility of establishing a permanent committee to study this phenomenon. Wow. It could have been really something. And in fact, the motion passed, but not surprisingly, over the months to follow, it was allowed to die in committee. Anyway, in November of 1978, as somebody who had contributed to or attempted to contribute to the editing of this particular paper, I was invited to witness these meetings. And there on the floor of the General Assembly, speaking to the delegates, I'm sure less than half of whom showed up. This is not a subject that most diplomats look forward to dealing with, especially back then.
Yes, no
Please
doubt.
don't tell me I have to go back to my country and say we need to take UFOs seriously. I love my cushy job here in New York and my apartment and all of my fancy friends. I don't want to have anything to do with this. The fact was, the day before, there had been a major blizzard. So there was some legitimacy to people not getting to work or to the hearings. Anyway, that day, remembering that I've never been to a UFO conference, I get to hear on the floor of the General Assembly arguing why this is important. Dr. Alan Hynek, Dr. Jacques Vallée, Stanton Friedman, statement from astronaut Alan Cooper, who would have been there had his flight from Texas not been canceled because of a snowstorm, and also a remarkable military witness, Lawrence Coyne, was lieutenant colonel who in the 80s was involved in an incident over Ohio where the helicopter that he was either in or piloting encountered a large disc-shaped UFO and tried to drop away from it. And instead, against the pilot trying to control the helicopter, it pulled it up 1,800 feet before it allowed it to go.
Wow.
Anyway, it was a very special day for me, quite historic. My folks who were supportive of what I did and wonderful people both took the day off from work and met me at the UN. So they were there as well. The experience was very valuable, and the irony was that the little Caribbean nation of Grenada was behind this initiative, but behind Prime Minister Eric Gary was a 20-something New Yorker pushing him to make this event a reality. And that was Lee Spiegel, who went on to become a ranking journalist and covered UFOs and the paranormal for many years for the Huffington Post, as well as other publications, remains a very dear friend, but he organized it. And we didn't actually meet for another 10 years when I was a guest on his talk show on NBC Radio. But our parents may well have sat next to each other in the gallery. And again, people sometimes like to make believe that individuals can't make a difference.
Yes.
And they can. And this is a perfect example.
That's brilliant. Thank you for sharing that.
Glad to.
You know, that's something that I think people forget. You know, we live in such a environment where there's a lot of shouting people down. People are hesitant to take a stand, to have something controversial to say, even if it would not normally be controversial. They're afraid to be, standing out in any shape, form, or fashion to draw attention. But sometimes, what if people had not been willing to do that? And I don't mean just in this field, but you have to stand with your convictions. Yeah. And he did. And
you bet.
It's fantastic. I said it's fantastic.
Agreed.
Courage is a beautiful thing. Not to be confused with idiocy. Sometimes they look a lot alike. But for me, I always try to play like it's courage. So, but, I think that being able to do that, and you did the same thing before Parliament, did you not? You prepared information for the British Parliament.
It was a similar situation, also working for Coleman. who once again, because in this case of his friendship with a member of parliament named Brinsley Lepore Trench, an earl actually of Clancherty, I think, who invited him to submit a paper for consideration by the House of Lords in their debate in the early 80s on the same subject. And once again, although, your head's basically in paper and, fact checking and that kind of thing, you're not there, but it was terribly exciting to be a part of nonetheless.
Well, sure it was. I mean, how many people get to do that? I think that's really special. Well, when you started going forward and you started working with Bud and you started hearing other people's experiences too, how did you transition to being the person doing the things that you are today? Because you're a media person, you are considered an expert on so many different facets of the experiencer side of things. You speak to everyone, and it's really special what you do. You bring so many different facets of the UFO experience to one spot. How did you position yourself to be able to do that? Did you just decide that this needs to happen?
Well, I have to say, when I started, there was really no pleasure in this. I grew to think over the first year or so that what I was doing was really quite exotic, and that if I talked about it too much, I would estrange people that I cared about. But I was living this very interior life of, my God, this is really happening, with very little in the world around me to validate it. I had a great deal of trouble, in fact, not obsessing about it, to the degree that I ultimately found a psychotherapist who I knew something about before the fact, and knew that as a respected psychiatrist, years earlier, he had the courage to publish in a medical journal about his 2 UFO sightings as things that had happened to him, not as some kind of psychological aberration. And he almost lost his job as a head administrator at a major hospital down in New Jersey. Anyway, he helped me to normalize my attitude about it, in that he was very clear that the world is crazy regarding this subject, not people that have these experiences.
Yes.
And that there actually was a need for people who could bring this information in a way that was not insulting or extreme in its format to more and more the general public. And that if I felt strongly enough about what I was doing, maybe I should simply keep doing it and make a difference in that. And I will always thank Dr. Baker for that. But to get to your question, for me, our human interests run along a gun sight. I don't know if it's that way for everybody, but so many things are interesting to me and have been since I was a little kid. It's the same way it is for most of us, but our interests evolve and change. Yes. In the world of UFO studies, if I was, you see right in back of me here, the spines of a lot of old 3-ring notebooks, and they're all filled with hand-typed stuff and handwritten stuff and stuff that's been cut and pasted. Some of them go back 40 years or so. I keep them because, for me, they're a good reminder of how, for somebody else, hopefully, in the future, to look at them and say, oh, this is the origin of cut and paste. I remember how funny I thought that was when I first started to work on a word processor. So, gee, I do that with a scissor and a pen. But as one interest in the subject would become pronounced, it might take me off onto a tangent, and abduction research certainly would do that. I wanted to learn more about psychological conditions that skeptics said this might be, or a component of. Then I wanted to learn more about how hypnotic regression addresses the human mind. Then I wanted to know more about post-traumatic stress, and so on. I'm giving a talk tomorrow morning, virtually from here in my office, for a psychology class at the University of Southampton in England that is studying the psychology of advertising at the time. And some years back, simply because I was curious, I assigned myself the subject of UFOs and alien imagery in advertising. Is it just something that sells products? You know, people will stop and look, and if they take UFOs seriously, great. If they don't, they can laugh at it, but they still may buy whatever it's advertising.
Well, sure.
Or is there something more to it? There have been people in the work who have suggested that it's part of a covert plan, especially going back years ago, to aid disclosure. You know, a lot of aliens and UFOs and ads. And I did a really serious analysis of it based on dozens and dozens and dozens of print ads over several decades, finding the patterns, or what I felt were the patterns in it, and giving it ultimately as a conference talk, and then assigning myself something else. But the professor at this school had read some of my work and asked me if I had done anything in that area. And I said, I absolutely have. And I'd be happy to address your class on it. So one thing leads to another. It's just human curiosity. And, you know, for every book behind me there are several others probably going off on tangents that book may have created an interest in for me.
Wow, there is going to be a lot of cross-referencing to get those answers. But how much fun to be able to do that. I have, mine are not as organized as yours are at this point, but I have documented as well, and it serves me well. When I'm trying to find a particular guest on a particular topic, it's a handy dandy. And I'm going to go ahead and take us to this final break, and that way we can just wrap things up without interrupting again. So we'll be right back. Y'all come back too. And thank you for listening.
You're listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experience Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Oh, come on. I'm Southern, but... Nope. That'll do. Hello. I am Kat Hobson, host of Paranormal Experience here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. I enjoy having guests from all areas of the paranormal, from ghosts to ufology to cryptids and beyond. You'll find some of the best researchers in their fields bringing you some great information. Join me on Wednesday nights from 8 to 10 p. Eastern here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
Since 1948, Fate magazine has brought you reports of the strange and unknown, all of them true. Fate Radio is carrying on that tradition, bringing you the unusual, macabre, strange, and bizarre. Join host Kat Hobson Sunday nights from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
Listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experienced Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Welcome back to Fate Mag Radio. I'm so glad you're here. I'm Kat Hobson, your host, with my wonderful guest, Peter Robbins. And, if you don't mind, Peter, I would like to... Is it okay if I share what we were talking about as we were coming back on?
Sure.
We were talking about, and for those listening who are regulars, you know that I always say that someday somebody's going to record those breaks and share them, but it's not going to be me because I like that people come and talk to me. So, but we were discussing the fact that what both of us do is the unknown. Ufology. I study ufology. I am primarily a paranormal person. But to me, they all seem to be together, whether it's ufology, spirituality, ghosts. I mean, we don't know where any of these come from, but we know people are having experiences. But I never project myself as an expert in anything, and you were saying the same. Because how can you be an expert in the unknown? And I'm sorry, I'm going to use that in the future.
It's all yours.
It's a great line, right? And it's factual. So, and I commented that the last 3 shows I've been a guest on all wanted to talk about, well, 2 were black-eyed children, the other was ufology. And I'm a student of ufology. I love it. I love the topic. I love talking to people like you who have done this for, 40 years, as you said. And I find it fascinating because there are very few things that you can work on for 40 years and not have a concrete answer. And,
True.
From the Foo Fighters to, Ezekiel's Wheel, to things that we're seeing today, it's really only the structure, not the methodology, apparently, that has changed in all those different vehicles. And the actual, lift and go is relatively the same. People think that the Foo Fighters were spinning and, with the centrifugal force. I've heard that. And obviously the wheel was spinning. There's so many different references through history to these events. And I know that you've studied all of that over time. I'm sure those have come across your desk here and there. But do you find it interesting that really we don't know? They're still silent. There's not a lot of things that have changed, I think, in the reporting of how these objects move, is there?
What's your actual question?
And have you seen a difference in the reporting of how these objects are moving, behaving?
Not as such. I mean, once again, it all seems to be happening on the same stage. On genuine anomalous UFOs may zigzag. They may make right angle turns at high speeds. They may sit without moving, in the sky. Landing scenarios I don't know of any new moves, so to say, that have come in since I've been aware. Those descriptions have always been around, at least that I'm aware of, to one degree or another, from the get-go.
Well, and we always hear about the G's, that humans would not be able to tolerate those G-forces. And I find that interesting too, because if they're us from the future, they would still be humans in some form or fashion. So you have different things to look at as far as did we, it's like it brings more questions. Did we advance ourselves enough or advance the technology enough to protect a fragile human body from incredible G-forces that would be necessary to do those maneuvers without being in a flight suit that's going to cut your circulation off and kill you anyway, But there's so much, Robert says sometimes they appear and disappear in full view. And that's
exactly
true.
Another thing as well. Yes.
Yes. But I'm throwing all kinds of questions in one sentence at you, and I'm sorry about that. But I just think that you're so knowledgeable, and you've been such a great guest and just willing to answer anything. And I appreciate that. But we have one more question for you. And that is, where do you go from here? What are you going to do next?
Me personally?
You personally.
Yeah. I think I've learned as a communicator that I'm probably best at sticking to the territory that I'm most drawn to, which is very nuts and bolts. I function allegorically, at least, at a very low vibration. I build cases the same way that one might if you were an attorney or in law enforcement investigating some allegation. I look to have different kinds of evidence that support the same conclusion. It might be historical or anecdotal. What I'm saying is, I think I'm best at introducing the subject to people in a decidedly real-world post-war context. And in a good number of my talks, I locate whatever the UFO aspect of the talk is in terms of the history that's going on around it. Give it some relationship to the moment in time that it's happening. Yeah. And I'd like to think that after a basic presentation, at the least somebody will come away thinking, well, they don't seem completely crazy. They're not stumbling over their words. The things that they said made basic sense to me. They cited certain things that were the equivalent of footnotes that I can look up and prove to myself that this, that, or the other thing is factual. And I'm a little more interested now. I feel maybe I'll read a book or see a documentary or just go to another conference or watch another documentary. At the same time, the medium that I work in continues to shift. I like giving live presentations. Next to that, doing what we're doing and continuing to be available to other people in the business. Right now, I'm very excited to be working as a consultant on, one might say, yet one more UFO documentary. I think it's very special, and I'm very glad to be on a non-disclosure agreement as it develops, so I can just say I can't talk about it, and you'll see it when it comes out.
I will see it when it comes out.
Otherwise, like most people, I am actually living a life aside from what I'm better known for, and being out here in the countryside and a homeowner, it's always what's going to break down next, or do I have to pay for another driveway plowing this week, or what am I going to make a lot of to put away for dinner choices for this month, or what is my cat telling me to do now? All the usual life things.
Not this cat. So, but oh my goodness, I do not miss having to have my driveway plowed. I am happy to be urban right now. And you went the other way. So,
well, if I had any choice, I would be right back in the middle of New York City right now. I am a city person, but I love the countryside as well. I'm very thankful I have this wonderful home base, and I get to the city when I can.
Yeah, I love New York. My daughter lived there for a whole year. Then she lived in Denver for a year. And now she has been where she is for 3 years, going on 4. So she seems to be pretty happy there. But I really, really loved New York. So I would be glad when things settle down and we can all get back to just doing us. And so, do you live north of New York?
Do I ever?
Do you live north of the city?
I do. I live about a 4-hour drive from Manhattan, New York City. I'm almost dead center in the state, a little below dead center, just outside of Ithaca, New York, best known for Cornell University.
Ah, so you are plowing. Different kind of plowing. So I lived in Georgia with a mud driveway. The Jeep was a necessity to get home. So I don't miss that at all. But I tell you what, I have enjoyed you so very much. You're a great person and a great researcher.
Thank you.
Do you want to tell people where they can find your show?
Yeah. The radio show, live 2-hour broadcast every Monday, 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. And all you have to do is go to the KGRA website. That's KGRADB.com, DB for digital broadcasting. A few minutes before 7 every Monday, click on live stream at the top of the page and you're there. You can find it audio only on Spreaker.com. And if you are on Facebook, I post links to the shows that I do, which immediately, I guess, by definition, become podcasts the moment that they're recorded, the day after the show is live. Every once in a while, there is a pre-recorded show, as there will be tomorrow, given other obligations, but that's how they can find me, and otherwise contact me through my Facebook page or through Meanwhile Here on Earth.
Which, by the way, is a great podcast, and KGRA is a great network. So just don't listen to anybody on Sunday nights, or I can't say that because Mark D'Antonio does a great show. But you know what? It doesn't matter, because there's so much information out there, and while we both would love to be the person giving it to you, there's so much more. I mean, don't lock yourself down. There's great places to learn and great people to learn from all over the place. So it's a matter of personal preference. And I never worry about promoting someone else. So, but thank you so much for your time. I know that it's valuable, and I appreciate you.
Well, you're most welcome, Kat. I was glad to do the show with you.
Thank you. And for our listeners, I just wanted to say that I know things are still kind of crazy, and that sometimes we don't necessarily like what we see when we look out into the world. And that's okay, because what we do is be ourselves. And if you don't like what you see, you can change that. I'm a great believer in manifesting what you want to see. And you can do that by being what you want. If you're thinking that, oh my gosh, I just don't have any friends, and a lot of people feel that way, try being a friend that you would like to have. You know, if you think that everyone is so upset, everyone is so, off the chain, well, make a little eye contact if you feel comfortable with that. Give a smile. Be who you would like to see. And you can really help make the world a better place. So enjoy it, do that, And thank you for listening. And I hope you will come back next week. Just enjoy your week.